The morning sun painted the glass towers of New Seoul in golden light as President Hyun-woo Kim stood at his office window, watching children play in the peace gardens below. 237 years had passed since the last war on Earth. 237 years of harmony, prosperity, and hope. He smiled as he saw the children from different nations laughing together, their voices mixing like a beautiful song of unity. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. His assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Mr. President, Admiral Dong-hyuk Nam is here for your morning briefing." "Send him in," Hyun-woo said, turning away from the window. Admiral Nam entered with his usual careful steps. The old soldier carried himself like a man who had seen too much, even though Earth had known only peace during his lifetime. His gray hair was perfectly neat, and his uniform bore the simple blue insignia of Earth's Defense Corps. The Defense Corps was mostly for show these days: rescue missions, disaster relief, and ceremonial duties for visiting aliens. "Good morning, Admiral," Hyun-woo said, gesturing to the comfortable chairs near his desk. "How are our friends in the galaxy today?" Nam sat down slowly, his weathered hands folding over a data pad. "The same as always, sir. The Vorthak Empire is arguing with the Clixon Swarm about mining rights in the Outer Spiral. The Luminar Collective is mediating as usual. Trade disputes, territorial disagreements, the normal diplomatic dance." Hyun-woo nodded. This was how the galaxy worked. 47 different species, all members of the Galactic Confederation, solving their problems through long discussions and economic pressure. No one had fought a real war in over 800 years. It was civilized. It was proper. It was everything humanity had hoped for when they first reached the stars. "And our colonies?" the president asked. "Growing well," Nam replied, but there was something in his voice that made Hyun-woo look at him more carefully. New Geneva just completed their third terraforming phase. The agricultural yields are exceeding all projections. Dr. Yoonji Lee's environmental restoration techniques are being requested by 6 other species. "That's wonderful news," Hyun-woo said. "Our peaceful methods are helping the entire galaxy prosper." Nam was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. "Sir, I've been reviewing our defense capabilities again." Hyun-woo sighed. They had this conversation every few months. "Admiral, we've been through this. Earth maintains sufficient defensive measures. Our planetary shields, our orbital platforms, our patrol ships, more than enough to handle pirates or accidents." "Yes, sir," Nam said. "But what about something more serious?" "Like what?" Hyun-woo asked, sitting forward. "Admiral, look around you. Look at what we've built. 2 centuries without a single human killed in warfare. Our children don't even understand what war means. We've solved hunger, disease, poverty. We've turned Mars into a garden and made Venus breathable. We've created paradise, and you want to prepare for violence that will never come." Nam looked out the window at the playing children. "I hope you're right, sir. I truly do." Far from Earth, in the Outer Rim territories, Captain So-hyun Choi stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel New Horizon. She was young for a ship's captain, only 32, but her quick mind and natural leadership had earned her the position. Around her, the bridge crew worked quietly, monitoring their ship's approach to the Kepler 442 system. "Captain," called out her communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's Jin-ho." So-hyun smiled. Her younger brother had been working on the terraforming project for 2 years now. "Put him through." Jin-ho's cheerful face appeared on the main screen. Behind him, So-hyun could see the rolling green hills of New Geneva Colony. What had once been a barren rock was now home to nearly 200,000 humans, with forests, rivers, and cities that gleamed in the alien sun. "Nuna!" Jin-ho said, using the Korean word for older sister. "You have to see what we've accomplished. The atmospheric processors are working better than we ever dreamed. The oxygen levels are perfect, and we've got 3 different ecosystems thriving." "That's amazing, Jin-ho," So-hyun said, feeling proud of her brother's work. "How are the other colonies responding to your techniques?" "That's the interesting part," Jin-ho replied. "We've had delegations from 12 different species come to study our methods. They can't believe how quickly we can turn dead worlds into living ones." The Vorthak delegation was particularly interested. They kept asking about our industrial capacity and resource allocation. Something about that made So-hyun pause. The Vorthak? I thought they preferred conquering already developed worlds rather than building their own. Jinho shrugged. Maybe. They're changing their approach. The galaxy's been peaceful for so long, everyone's learning new ways to prosper. After the call ended, So-hyun found herself thinking about her brother's words. The Vorthak Empire had a reputation for being aggressive traders and tough negotiators. They were large reptilian beings, built like walking tanks, with a culture that valued strength above all else. But like everyone else in the galaxy, they had learned to resolve disputes through the Confederation's diplomatic channels. Back on Earth, Dr. Yoonji Lee worked late in her laboratory, studying genetic samples from 17 different worlds. Her work in environmental restoration had made her famous throughout the galaxy. She could take a poisoned wasteland and turn it into fertile farmland in just a few years. Her techniques were considered miraculous by other species, but tonight, she wasn't thinking about plants or soil chemistry. She was reading historical files that Admiral Nam had quietly shared with her. Files about human warfare. Files about what humans had been capable of long ago before they chose the path of peace. The numbers were staggering. In just the 20th century alone, humans had killed over 100 million of their own kind in various wars. They had created weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. They had fought with a creativity and determination that seemed almost alien when compared to modern humanity. Yoonji closed the files and rubbed her tired eyes. Why was she even reading this ancient history? Humans had evolved beyond such brutality. They had learned that cooperation was better than conflict, that building was better than destroying. The old ways were dead and buried, and good riddance. Yet, something nagged at her as she walked home through the peaceful streets of Seoul. Other species in the galaxy seemed to view humans with a mixture of respect and something else. Pity? Condescension? As if they saw humanity as talented children who didn't understand how the real world worked. The next morning brought news that would change everything, though no one on Earth knew it yet. In the Vorthak High. Command? War Commander Thex Morvain stood before a room full of his subordinates, his massive reptilian frame casting shadows on the walls. His yellow eyes gleamed with anticipation as he spoke. "The humans have served their purpose," he said, his voice a low growl that resonated through the chamber. "Their terraforming techniques, their agricultural methods, their manufacturing processes. We have learned what we need. Now they become a liability." One of his officers spoke up. "Sir, the Galactic Confederation will object to any aggressive action." Thex Morvain's laugh was like grinding stone. "The Confederation objects to many things. They issue statements and hold hearings and pass resolutions. But when was the last time they actually stopped anyone from taking what they wanted? The humans' weakness is contaminating the galaxy. Other species see their success through peaceful means and begin to think that strength doesn't matter. This cannot be allowed to continue." "What are your orders, sir?" another officer asked. "Prepare the fleet," Thex Morvain said. "It's time the galaxy remembered that in the end, only the strong survive. And the humans." He paused, his massive teeth showing in what might have been a smile. "The humans are about to learn that their 2 centuries of peace have made them easy prey." On Earth, President Hyun-woo Kim finished his evening walk through the Memorial Gardens, where monuments honored the victims of humanity's last wars. He paused before the largest memorial, dedicated to the billions who had died in the great conflicts of the past. The inscription read simply, "Never again." As he stood there in the gathering twilight, Hyun-woo felt a deep satisfaction. Humanity had kept its promise. They had built a better world, a better way of living. Whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them as they always had for the past 2 centuries, with wisdom, diplomacy, and an unshakable commitment to peace. He had no way of knowing that in the darkness between the stars, 47, Vorthak warships were already moving toward human space, their weapons charged and their intentions clear. The age of peace was about to end, and humanity would soon learn whether their noble ideals could survive in a galaxy where strength was the only currency that truly mattered. Captain So-hyun Choi was drinking her morning coffee when the emergency alarms began screaming throughout the new horizon. She had never heard that particular alarm before, the one that meant incoming hostile ships. For a moment she just stood there, cup in hand, trying to understand what was happening. Her communications officer's voice crackled over the ship's speakers. "Captain, we're detecting 47 large vessels dropping out of hyperspace. They're Vorthak warships, ma'am, and they're targeting New Geneva Colony." So-hyun dropped her coffee cup and ran to the bridge. On the main screen, she could see the massive Vorthak fleet taking positions around the peaceful world where her brother lived. The alien ships were dark and angular, built like weapons themselves. They dwarfed the small civilian vessels that were frantically trying to evacuate the planet's surface. "Get me a line to Jin-ho," she ordered, her voice tight with fear. Static filled the speakers for several long seconds. Then her brother's voice came through, strained and frightened. "Nuna, something's wrong. The Vorthak ships won't respond to our communications. They're powering up their weapons." "Jin-ho, you need to get to the evacuation ships right now," So-hyun said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I can't," Jin-ho replied. "I'm in the main terraforming facility. If I leave my post, the atmospheric processors could overload. The explosion would kill thousands of people in the surrounding areas." So-hyun felt her heart breaking. Her brother was always like this, putting others before himself. "Jin-ho, please, let someone else handle it. There's no one else who knows the systems well enough," he said. "Nuna, if something happens to me, tell Mom and Dad that The transmission cut off in a burst of static. On the main screen, So-hyun watched in horror as the Vorthak ships opened fire. But these weren't normal weapons. Instead of the quick, clean destruction that galactic warfare typically involved, the aliens were using something else. Plasma bombs that turned the very air toxic. Chemical weapons that poisoned the water and soil. They weren't just destroying New Geneva Colony. They were making sure nothing could ever live there again. So-hyun stood frozen on her bridge, watching 200,000 humans die in the space of 30 minutes. Her crew sat at their stations, in stunned silence. None of them had ever seen war before. None of them understood that such cruelty was possible. When it was over, New Geneva was a poisoned wasteland. The Vorthak ships simply left, disappearing into hyperspace as quickly as they had arrived. They left no message, no explanation, no demands. They had simply wiped out an entire human colony for no reason that anyone could understand. The news reached Earth 6 hours later. President Hyun-woo Kim sat in his office, staring at the reports with disbelief. Admiral Dong-hyuk Nam stood beside him, his face pale but unsurprised. Around the room, other government officials sat in shocked silence. 200,000 people, Hyun-woo said quietly. "Gone, just gone." "Sir," said his communications minister, "we need to contact the Galactic Confederation immediately. This is a clear violation of every treaty and law in known space." Admiral Nam spoke for the first time since receiving the news. "With respect, sir, I don't think the Confederation is going to help us." Everyone turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Hyun-woo asked. "I've been monitoring alien communications for the past few hours," Nam explained. "The general response seems to be that the humans failed to establish proper defensive protocols and that the Vorthak were acting within their rights to claim the system." "That's insane," the defense minister said. "New Geneva was a recognized human colony with full Confederation protection." "Apparently not," Nam replied grimly. "It seems that our protection only applies when someone wants to file a formal complaint and wait for a committee to investigate." Dr. Yoon-ji Lee was working late in her laboratory when the emergency call came. The government needed her expertise to analyze the weapons that had been used against New Geneva. They wanted to understand what had been done to the planet and whether it could ever be reversed. The data was horrifying. The Vorthak had used outlawed chemical weapons that would poison the soil for generations. They had released biological agents that would kill any plant or animal life that tried to take root. They had turned a garden world into a toxic nightmare that would take centuries to heal, if it ever could. But what disturbed Yoon-ji most was the precision of the attack. This wasn't random violence or simple conquest. The Vorthak had studied human terraforming techniques and then developed weapons specifically designed to undo everything humanity had built. They had turned human knowledge against humanity itself. As she worked through the night, Analyzing sample after sample of poisoned soil and water, Yunji began to understand something terrible. This attack wasn't the beginning of a war. It was the end of one. A war that humanity had never known they were fighting. 3 days after the destruction of New Geneva, President Hyun-woo Kim stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Confederation. Representatives from 47 species filled the Great Assembly Hall, their various forms creating a rainbow of shapes and colors. At the center of the chamber, the crystalline being known as Council Speaker Veltar Nexus presided over the proceedings. "Honored Speaker," Hyun-woo began, "I come before this assembly to demand justice for the unprovoked attack on New Geneva Colony. 200,000 innocent civilians were murdered in violation of every law and treaty that governs civilized space." Veltar Nexus's crystalline form shimmered as it spoke, its voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "President Kim, the Confederation expresses its deep regret for the loss of life. However, we must also note that the human colony failed to establish adequate defensive measures despite repeated warnings about the unstable nature of that particular star system." "Warnings?" Hyun-woo said, confused. "We received no warnings. New Geneva had been a recognized colony for 15 years. A new voice spoke from the assembly floor. War Commander Thex Morvain rose from his seat, his massive reptilian form dwarfing the smaller beings around him. "The Vorthak Empire filed proper territorial claims on that system through appropriate channels. The humans chose to ignore our legal documentation." "What legal documentation?" Hyun-woo demanded. "We never received any territorial disputes." "Perhaps," Thex Morvain said, with what might have been a smile, "the humans should have paid more attention to the fine print of galactic law instead of focusing on their gardening projects." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Hyun-woo realized with growing horror that many of the alien representatives seemed to agree with the Vorthak commander. They weren't seeing this as murder. They were seeing it as a property dispute that had been resolved through traditional means. "Honored Speaker," Hyun-woo said desperately, "surely the Confederation can see that this was an act of genocide? Chemical weapons were used. Biological agents. These are war crimes under every definition." Veltar Nexus was quiet for a long moment. When it finally spoke, its words chilled Hyun-woo to the bone. "President Kim, the Confederation understands your grief. However, we must also recognize that the galaxy operates according to certain natural laws. Species that cannot defend themselves have historically found it difficult to maintain their territorial claims. Perhaps it would be wise for humanity to consider this lesson as you move forward." Hyun-woo stared at the crystalline being in disbelief. "Are you saying that might makes right? That strength is the only law that matters?" "I am saying," Veltar Nexus replied, "that the galaxy has operated this way for millennia. The strong protect what is theirs. The weak adapt or disappear." As Hyun-woo left the assembly hall, he felt something dying inside him. Not just his faith in galactic justice, but his faith in the peaceful future that humanity had worked so hard to build. Behind him, he could hear the alien representatives already moving on to other business, as if the destruction of New Geneva had been nothing more than a minor administrative matter. Back on Earth, Dr. Yoonji Lee made a discovery that changed everything. While researching the attack on New Geneva, she had started looking into galactic history. What she found in the archives made her blood run cold. This had happened before. Not once, not twice, but dozens of times over the past 1,000 years. Peaceful species that had joined the Confederation, contributed their knowledge and resources, and then simply disappeared. Their colonies destroyed, their populations scattered, their civilizations forgotten. The pattern was always the same. A peaceful species would develop something useful: new technology, better agriculture, innovative medicine. They would share their knowledge freely, believing that cooperation would protect them. Then, when they had outlived their usefulness, a stronger species would find an excuse to eliminate them. The Confederation would express regret and move on. Humanity, Yoonji realized, had been marked for extinction from the moment they had shared their terraforming technology. They had made themselves useful, and then they had made themselves vulnerable. The only question was how long the galaxy would allow them to exist before deciding they were no longer needed. That night, Yunji sat in her laboratory, surrounded by data that painted a picture of humanity's future, or lack thereof. She thought about Jinho Choi, who had died trying to save others. The emergency meeting took place in the deepest bunker beneath Seoul, in a room that had not been used for over 200 years. President Hyun-woo Kim sat at the head of a long table, his face aged 10 years in the 3 weeks since New Geneva's destruction. Around him sat the most important people on Earth, military leaders, scientists, and politicians who were about to make the hardest decision in human history. Admiral Dong-hyuk Nam stood at the front of the room, pointing to a holographic display that showed human space. Red markers indicated the locations where Vorthak ships had been spotted in recent days. There were dozens of them, moving closer to other human colonies. "They're not done," Nam said simply. "Intelligence reports indicate the Vorthak are preparing to attack New Harmony Colony next. After that, probably New Tokyo. They plan to eliminate every human settlement outside of Earth's solar system." Defense Minister Park Sung-ho spoke up from across the table. "What about the Confederation? Surely they won't allow a complete genocide." Dr. Yunji Lee opened the file in front of her. "I've been studying galactic history for the past 3 weeks. In the last 1,000 years, 17 peaceful species have been completely wiped out. The Confederation's response was always the same: expressions of regret, followed by complete inaction." 17 species, whispered Communications Minister Lee So-jin. "How is that possible?" "Because the galaxy doesn't work the way we thought it did," Yunji replied. "We believed that cooperation and peace were signs of civilization, but to most alien species they're signs of weakness. Prey animals that need to be culled when they're no longer useful." President Hyun-woo Kim had been silent through most of the meeting. Now he spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. "Admiral Nam, tell me honestly, if we choose to fight back, what are our chances?" Nam was quiet for a long moment. "Sir, if we fight the way they expect us to fight, ship against ship, fleet against fleet, we'll lose. The Vorthak have been building their military for centuries. They have more ships, more experience, more firepower." "But?" Hyun-woo asked, sensing there was more. "But they don't understand what human warfare really means," Nam continued. "They think war is about territory and resources. They fight for profit and conquest. They've never faced an enemy that fights for survival, for revenge, for the complete destruction of everything that threatens them." Around the table, the ministers shifted uncomfortably. These were words that had not been spoken in human government for 2 centuries. "What are you suggesting, Admiral?" asked Defense Minister Park. Nam looked directly at the president. "I'm suggesting we stop trying to be civilized and start remembering what we really are. Humans didn't become the dominant species on Earth by being peaceful. We became dominant by being the most dangerous predators the planet had ever seen." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what Nam was really saying. He was asking them to abandon 200 years of progress, 200 years of peace, 200 years of everything that made them proud to be human. Dr. Yunji Lee spoke into the silence. "I've been analyzing our current technology. Our manufacturing systems, our AI networks, our space infrastructure. We've been calling it civilian technology, but that's not really true. We've built the most advanced industrial base in galactic history. If we retool it for war..." She paused, looking around the room. "We could build weapons that would terrify every species in the galaxy." "And what would that make us?" asked Communications Minister Lee. "What would we become if we choose that path?" President Hyun-woo Kim stood up slowly. He walked to the window that looked out over Seoul's peaceful streets. Children were still playing in the parks. People were still going about their daily lives, unaware that their entire civilization hung in the balance. "We would become what we need to become to survive," he said finally. "Admiral Nam, you have my authorization to begin immediate military preparations. Dr. Lee, I want you to head up technology development. We're going to war." The transformation began immediately. In secret facilities across Earth, machines that had been building schools and hospitals were retooled to build weapons. Scientists who had spent their careers healing diseases began developing new ways to kill. Engineers who had terraformed dead worlds started designing ways to destroy living ones. Commander Yu-Jin Song had been a peacekeeping officer for 15 years. She had spent her career resolving disputes, providing disaster relief, and maintaining order in the outer colonies. Now she found herself in charge of something called the Strategic Warfare Division, tasked with developing military doctrine for a species that had forgotten how to fight. She spent her days studying the old records, files from humanity's bloody past that had been locked away and nearly forgotten. The strategies of Alexander the Great, the tactics of Napoleon, the psychological warfare of the 20th century. She learned about concepts that no alien species had ever developed. Total, war, acceptable losses, and the idea that sometimes you had to destroy everything to save what mattered most. The aliens fight with rules, she explained to her staff during one of their planning sessions. They have codes of honor, traditional methods, established procedures. They expect their enemies to follow the same patterns, but humans don't fight with rules. When we're cornered, when our families are threatened, we fight with everything we have. One of her officers raised his hand. Ma'am, what exactly does that mean in practical terms? Yu-Jin Song pulled up a holographic display showing the Vorthak Empire's territory. It means we don't just defeat their military. We destroy their ability to make war. We target their shipyards, their manufacturing centers, their communication networks. We make them understand that attacking humanity costs more than they can afford to pay. Meanwhile, Captain So-hyun Choi volunteered for something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The Enhanced Soldier Program was humanity's attempt to create warriors who could match alien physical capabilities. But it wasn't just about physical enhancement. It was about psychological conditioning. So-hyun lay in the medical chair as Dr. Kim Tae-young prepared the neural interface. Captain, this process will change you. You'll still be human, but you'll think differently about conflict, about violence, about what needs to be done to protect our species. Will I still remember Jin-ho? She asked, thinking of her brother, who had died on New Geneva. You'll remember him, Dr. Kim replied. But instead of just grieving for him, you'll be able to channel that grief into something useful, something deadly. The procedure took 6 hours. When So-hyun woke up, she felt different. The pain of her brother's death was still there, but it had been transformed into something cold and sharp. She understood now that grief could be a weapon, that love for the dead could fuel hatred for the living. As the weeks passed, more volunteers joined the Enhanced Soldier Program. They called themselves the Vengeance Corps, humans who had volunteered to become something harder, something more dangerous than their peaceful ancestors. Back in the government bunkers, Director Han Sol Lim worked on perhaps the most important project of all. The Psychological Warfare Division had a simple mission: make sure that every human on Earth understood exactly what was at stake. Every day, citizens received carefully edited footage from New Geneva. Images of the poisoned world where Jin-ho Choi had died, video of the Galactic Confederation's dismissive response, audio recordings of alien leaders discussing humanity's weakness and inevitable extinction. Han Sol knew it was manipulation, but it was necessary manipulation. Humanity needed to be angry. They needed to be united. They needed to understand that their choice was simple: become predators or become extinct. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Peace protests that had been common for centuries simply stopped. Instead, young people lined up at recruitment centers. Factories that had produced consumer goods switched to military production without a single worker complaining. Scientists abandoned their research into medicine and environmental restoration to work on weapons development. Dr. Yoon-ji Lee watched the transformation from her laboratory, where she was developing humanity's technological edge. The work was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. Weapons that could adapt to enemy defenses in real time. Ships that could repair themselves during battle. AI systems that learned enemy tactics faster than alien commanders could devise new strategies. But the most frightening development was something she called the uncertainty protocol. Instead of traditional military strategies based on controlling territory, humans would fight by creating chaos. Random attacks that enemy forces couldn't predict or prepare for, strikes that seemed to follow no logical pattern, designed to drive enemy soldiers insane with paranoia. "We're not just building weapons," she explained to President Hyun-woo Kim during one of their briefings. "We're building terror. When we're done, the word human will be something that alien children whisper in the dark." As Earth's transformation continued, the first reports began reaching alien intelligence networks. Human colonies that had been easy targets were suddenly empty, not destroyed, but simply abandoned. Human trade ships that had once carried agricultural products and medical supplies were now carrying cargo that their sensors couldn't identify. War Commander Thex Morvain was eating his morning meal when the first reports came in. His communications officer burst into the command chamber, his reptilian features pale with shock. "Sir, we're receiving emergency signals from across the Empire. 23 worlds are under simultaneous attack." Thex Morvain dropped his eating utensil and stared at the officer. "What kind of attack? Who dares assault the Vorthak Empire?" "The humans, sir," the officer replied, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, Thex Morvain couldn't process what he was hearing. Humans? The peaceful gardeners who couldn't even defend a single colony? "That's impossible. Show me." The main display activated, showing a tactical map of Vorthak space. Red warning indicators flashed on world after world, but these weren't the kind of attacks that Thex Morvain understood. The humans weren't targeting military bases or population centers. Instead, they were hitting power plants, communication relays, manufacturing facilities, and transport hubs. "Sir," another officer reported, "we're losing contact with our outer worlds. Not because they're being destroyed, but because their communication networks are being systematically dismantled." Thex Morvain watched in growing confusion as reports flooded in from across his empire. On Vorthak Prime's industrial moon, every factory had been reduced to scrap metal in the span of 2 hours. On the military world of Carex, the orbital shipyards had simply vanished. Not exploded, but somehow disintegrated at the molecular level. On the trade hub of Nexus Station, every computer system had been infected with a virus that turned their own security systems against them. "How many ships are they using?" Thex Morvain demanded. "That's the problem, sir," his intelligence officer replied. "We can't detect any large human fleets. Our sensors show only small groups of ships, sometimes just single vessels. But somehow, they're causing massive damage across dozens of worlds simultaneously." Thex Morvain's confusion turned to anger. "Single ships? What kind of weapons could possibly—" His question was interrupted by an incoming transmission. The main screen flickered and then showed a human face. A young woman with cold, determined eyes. It was Captain So-Hyun Choi, though Thex Morvain didn't know her name. "Greetings, War Commander Thex Morvain," So-Hyun said, her voice eerily calm. "I am Captain So-Hyun Choi of the Human Defense Corps. I was on New Geneva when your forces murdered my brother and 200,000 innocent civilians." Thex Morvain found his voice. "Human, you dare to—" "I'm not here to talk," So-Hyun interrupted. "I'm here to educate you. You see, you made a mistake when you attacked New Geneva. You assumed that because we were peaceful, we were weak. You confused kindness with inability. That was your first error." On the tactical display behind her, Thex Morvain could see one of his own battleships, the mighty destroyer of worlds. But something was wrong with it. The ship was spinning slowly, its lights flickering. "Your second error," So-Hyun continued, "was thinking that war is about conquest and territory. You fight to take things. We fight to destroy things. Completely, permanently, without hope of recovery." The destroyer of worlds exploded on the screen, but not from external weapons fire. It had been destroyed from within, as if its own systems had turned against it. "Your third error was not understanding human psychology. When you killed my brother, you thought you were eliminating weakness. Instead, you created something much more dangerous, a human with nothing left to lose." Across Vorthak space, similar scenes were playing out on world after world. Human strike teams materialized out of nowhere, not to conquer territory, but to dismantle civilization itself. They attacked infrastructure with surgical precision, turning advanced worlds into pre-industrial wastelands in a matter of hours. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't the physical damage. It was the psychological. warfare. On every Vorthak world, the same message was being broadcast simultaneously. Detailed footage of what had happened on New Geneva, followed by the faces and names of every human who had died there. Commander Yujin Song stood in the Strategic Command, center on Earth, watching as her carefully planned operation unfolded across the galaxy. She had spent months studying every aspect of Vorthak civilization, learning their weaknesses, understanding their psychology. "Status report," she called out to her staff. "Phase 1 is complete," reported her operations officer. "All primary. Infrastructure targets have been neutralized. Vorthak military communications are down by 87%. "Phase 2? Yujin asked. "Underway. Psychological warfare protocols are being implemented across all target worlds. Enemy morale is dropping faster than our models predicted," Yujin nodded. This was what the aliens didn't understand about human warfare. It wasn't enough to defeat an enemy. You had to break their will to fight. You had to make them understand that resistance was not just futile, but genuinely terrifying. "Initiate. Phase 3, she ordered. Across Vorthak space, the third phase of Operation Righteous Fury began. This was perhaps the most alien concept of all to species like the Vorthak. Humans began capturing enemy ships not to destroy them, but to convert them into broadcasting stations. Every captured Vorthak vessel began transmitting the same message throughout their space. "You taught us that mercy is weakness. We are no longer weak." Admiral Dong Hyuk Nam watched the operation from his command ship in Earth orbit. At his age, he had never expected to see humanity at war. But now that it was happening, he felt a grim satisfaction. This was what he had tried to warn President Kim about for years. Humans were dangerous when they chose to be. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Vorthak commanders." "Denied," Nam replied without hesitation. "This isn't about conquest. This is about education. The galaxy needs to learn what happens when you attack humanity." Dr. Yunji Lee stood in her laboratory, monitoring the deployment of humanity's most advanced weapons. These weren't the crude bombs and missiles that other species used. Human weapons learned and adapted. They studied enemy defenses and then evolved to overcome them. They turned enemy technology against itself. But her most effective creation wasn't a weapon at all. It was an idea. The uncertainty protocol was working better than she had ever dreamed. Vorthak military commanders were paralyzed by their inability to predict where humans would strike next. They were pulling their forces back from offensive operations to defend their own worlds, but even that didn't help because humans weren't following any logical attack pattern. "Dr. Lee," her assistant called out, "we're getting reports that several Vorthak worlds are evacuating their populations." Yunji smiled grimly. "Good. Let them run. Let them tell the rest of the galaxy what human anger looks like." On the Vorthak homeworld, panic was spreading through the government. War Commander Thex Morvain found himself summoned before the High Council, a gathering of the most powerful military leaders in the Empire. "Explain this disaster," growled High Commander Vex Thanor, whose scarred hide spoke of centuries of warfare. "How can prey animals be destroying our empire?" "They're not prey animals," Thex Morvain admitted, his voice hollow. "We made a fundamental error in our assessment of human capabilities." "What kind of error?" Thanor demanded. "We assumed that because they were peaceful, they were incapable of violence. But it's the opposite. They're peaceful because they know how dangerous they are. When we forced them to abandon peace, we unleashed something that no species in the galaxy has ever faced before." Around the council chamber, the most feared warriors in Vorthak space looked at each other with growing unease. They had built their empire through strength and intimidation. They understood conquest and domination. But what the humans were doing was something else entirely. "They're not trying to conquer us," Thex Morvain continued. "They're trying to unmake us. Every attack is designed to reduce our civilization back to a primitive state. They're not just defeating our military. They're erasing our ability to ever threaten anyone again." High Commander Thanor leaned forward. "How do we stop them? I don't know," Thex Morvain replied. "Every tactical doctrine we have assumes the enemy wants something. Territory, resources, submission. But the humans don't want anything from us except our complete inability to harm them." As if summoned by their conversation, every screen in The council chamber suddenly displayed the same image. Captain So-hyun Choi, broadcasting from the bridge of a captured Vorthak command ship. "Leaders of the Vorthak Empire," she said, her voice carrying clearly through their most secure facility. "I want you to understand something. This isn't revenge, though my brother's death certainly motivated it. This isn't conquest because we don't want your worlds. This is education." The screens shifted to show tactical displays of Vorthak space. Over half their worlds were now marked in red, not destroyed, but completely defenseless. "You made a calculation. When you attacked New Geneva," So-hyun continued, "you decided that the benefits of eliminating humanity outweighed the risks. You were wrong. The risk was never that we would fight back like you expected. The risk was that we would fight back like humans." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer, but somehow more terrifying. "We are going to continue this operation until every world in your empire is reduced to the technological level of a farming community." The trial of War Commander Thex Morvain was broadcast across the galaxy. In the Great Assembly Hall on Earth, representatives from dozens of species sat in stunned silence as they watched something they had never seen before: a human court of justice. Judge Min Seok Kong sat behind a simple wooden desk, wearing the plain black robes that human judges had worn for centuries. There were no grand displays of power, no intimidating architecture, no theatrical drama. Just a quiet room where justice would be served. Thex Morvain stood in chains before the court, his massive reptilian form diminished by defeat. 18 months earlier, he had commanded the most powerful military force in his sector of the galaxy. Now he was the last surviving leader of an empire that no longer existed. "War Commander Thex Morvain," Judge Kang said in a calm voice, "you stand accused of genocide, the use of prohibited weapons, and crimes against civilian populations. How do you plead?" Thex Morvain raised his head defiantly. "I plead that I was following the natural order of the galaxy. The strong survive. The weak perish. This has always been the way." Judge Kang nodded slowly. "That defense might have worked in the old galaxy, but you taught humanity something important when you destroyed New Geneva. You taught us that the old ways were wrong." Captain So-hyun Choi stepped forward as the primary witness. Her uniform bore new insignia now. She was a fleet admiral, promoted after her role in the destruction of the Vorthak Empire. But her eyes still held the pain of her brother's death. "Your Honor," she began, "I was present during the attack on New Geneva Colony. I watched as this defendant ordered the use of chemical weapons against civilian populations. I listened to the communications as he gave specific instructions to ensure that no human survivors would be found." She turned to look directly at Thex Morvain. "But this trial isn't about revenge. It's about establishing a new principle for galactic civilization, the principle that genocide has consequences." For 3 days, witnesses testified about the destruction of New Geneva. They showed footage of the poisoned world, played recordings of the final communications from dying colonists, and presented evidence of the systematic nature of the Vorthak attack. Through it all, Thex Morvain remained defiant. "You humans speak of justice," he growled during his final statement. "But what you have done to my empire is no different from what I did to your colony." Judge Kang leaned forward. "War Commander, that is where you are wrong. We didn't poison your worlds. We didn't use banned weapons against your civilians. We simply removed your ability to harm others. Your people are alive, farming their fields, living peaceful lives. The 200,000 humans on New Geneva are dead forever." The sentence was swift and final. Thex Morvain was condemned to life imprisonment on New Geneva itself, tending the memorial gardens that had been built where the colony once stood. He would spend the rest of his life caring for the graves of the people he had ordered killed. As the trial ended and Thex Morvain was led away in chains, the real message became clear to every species watching. Humanity had developed something that no other civilization possessed: a system of justice that was both merciful and terrifying. President Hyunwoo Kim, now older and marked by the hard decisions he had made, addressed the Galactic Confederation for the second time. But this time the Great Assembly Hall was different. Where once representatives had lounged in their seats with casual indifference, now they sat upright and paid attention. Fellow beings, Hyunwoo began, his voice carrying easily through the silent chamber. 18 months ago, I stood before you asking for justice. You told me that the galaxy operated by the law of strength, that the weak had no rights that the strong were bound to respect. He paused, looking around at the assembled aliens. Many couldn't meet his eyes. You were right, he continued. The galaxy did operate that way, past tense, because you taught humanity that peaceful coexistence was impossible under the old rules. So we changed the rules. Council Speaker Veltar Nexus, the crystalline being who had dismissed humanity's pleas for justice, spoke hesitantly. President Kim, what are humanity's intentions now? Your military capabilities have been demonstrated. What do you plan to do with this power? Hyunwoo Kim smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. We plan to ensure that what happened to New Geneva never happens again, to anyone. We are establishing a new doctrine for galactic civilization. He gestured to Admiral Dong-hyuk Nam, who stepped forward with a document that would reshape the galaxy. The human defense doctrine is simple, Nam announced. Humanity will no longer participate in the Confederation's diplomatic games. We will no longer wait for committees and hearings and resolutions. From this day forward, any act of genocide, any use of prohibited weapons against civilians, any attempt to eliminate a peaceful species will result in immediate human intervention. What kind of intervention? Asked a delegate from the Clixon. Swarm, her insectoid features twitching nervously. The kind that ends civilizations, Nam replied bluntly. We demonstrated with the Vorthak that we don't fight to conquer. We fight to eliminate threats, permanently. Across the assembly hall, murmurs of fear rippled through the gathered species. They were beginning to understand that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted in a fundamental way. Dr. Yoonji Lee stood in her laboratory on Earth, watching the news broadcasts from across the galaxy. In just 18 months, everything had changed. Species that had been enemies for centuries were suddenly signing peace treaties. Trade disputes that had seemed intractable were being resolved through negotiation. The Luminar Collective had established a new council for peaceful conflict resolution. Dr. Lee, her assistant called out, we're receiving another request for humanitarian aid. The Corvin Republic wants our help restoring their homeworld after the mining disasters. Yoonji nodded. This was the other side of humanity's new role in the galaxy. Along with their demonstrated ability to destroy, they had also shown their capacity to heal and build. Former enemies were now lining up to request human assistance with environmental restoration, medical research, and technological development. Approve it, she said, but make sure they understand the conditions. The conditions were always the same. Any species that received human aid also accepted human protection, and human protection came with absolute zero tolerance for aggression against others. Commander Eugene Song walked through the memorial gardens on New Geneva, watching as Thex Morvain tended the graves of his victims. The former war commander was older now, his reptilian hide gray with age and regret. He had not spoken a word in months, simply performing his duties in silence. Do you think he's learned anything? Asked Captain Park Jae-won, Eugene's aide. Eugene watched as Thex Morvain carefully watered the flowers around a particular grave, that of Jinho Choi. I think he's learned that choices have consequences. Whether that makes him a better being is up to him. They walked in silence for a while, passing memorial stones that bore the names of 200,000 humans. The gardens were beautiful now, filled with flowers and trees from dozens of worlds. It was a place of peace built on the graves of those who had died for peace. Commander, Park asked, do you think we did the right thing, abandoning our peaceful ways? Eugene stopped at a bench overlooking the main memorial. We didn't abandon peace, Captain. We just learned that sometimes you have to fight for it. The difference is that now, when we choose peace, it's because we're strong enough to choose otherwise. On Earth, children played in parks that had once been military training grounds. Schools that had taught weapons design were back to teaching medicine and engineering. The massive war machine that humanity had built was being quietly dismantled and converted back to civilian purposes. But the knowledge remained. The shipyards that could build weapons of unimaginable destruction, soldiers who had learned to fight without rules or mercy. the scientists who understood how to turn any technology into an instrument of war. Admiral Dong-hyuk Nam stood in his office, looking at reports from across human space. The colonies that had been evacuated during the war were being resettled. New worlds were being terraformed. Trade with alien species was booming as everyone sought to maintain good relationships with humanity. "Sir," his aide reported, "we're receiving intelligence that the Skorian Empire is threatening the peaceful Alari species with territorial annexation." Nam didn't even look up from his reports. "Send them a message. One sentence, humanity is watching." That should be sufficient. It was sufficient. Within hours, the Skorian Empire announced that they had reached a peaceful agreement with the Alari. The threat of human intervention had ended a potential war before it could begin. President Hyunwoo Kim, in the final year of his term, walked through Seoul's Peace Gardens one last time as leader of humanity. The memorial to humanity's ancient wars was still there, still bearing the inscription, "Never Again." But now it had a different meaning. Never again would humanity be caught unprepared. Never again would they trust in the goodwill of others for their survival. Never again would they allow genocide to go unpunished. His successor, President-elect Song Mi-rae, joined him on his walk. "Mr. President," she said, "the alien delegates are asking what humanity's long-term plans are.